Hello, good morning from Oslo, and good afternoon in Beijing, and good evening, or whatever is the greeting, depending on where you're joining us from. It is a pleasure for me to welcome you to this webinar. My name is Dan Bannig, and I'm a professor at the University of Oslo. I'm a political scientist, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this event that we are co-organizing at the Center for Development and the Environment at the University of Oslo, together with the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. The topic today is something that I'm sure a lot of you have been thinking about, talking about, discussing, and that has to do with China and global governance in a post-COVID world. I know that a lot of us are preoccupied and perhaps spending too much time trying to follow the US elections and trying to come up with our best analysis. But today, of course, and I'm sure we'll talk about that too, but today our focus is to try and better understand China's role, China's growing influence in global governance, China's embrace of globalization, and what it means, particularly in relation to this ambitious Belt and Road Initiative that China has been undertaking since 2013. But the discourse, at least in some parts of the Western world, is often very polarized. And given COVID, there are all kinds of, I suppose, views and analysis that is questioning the extent to which this pandemic will impact Belt and Road Initiative activities, but also the kind of China's reputation abroad. And these are issues that I've been discussing with my colleagues and also my co-moderator today, Professor Liu Bao-Cheng. We did several podcast episodes that you may want to listen to later on. I'm also very pleased to inform you that we've also recently started a study here at the University of Oslo on looking at actually Chinese multilateralism and its impact on environmental and democratic governance in Africa and Latin America. This is a new project that is led by my colleague, Professor Benedicte Bull. So we have several things that we're going to discuss. This is a webinar, and we have learned that we don't really want too long sessions. People get bored. So I'm not going to get into a very detailed introduction of the speakers, but I can briefly mention that we are very delighted to have an excellent panel today, consisting of Professor Dao Zhongjia from Peking University. All of the bios are available on the website, and you'll see a link that my colleague Charlotte will share with you in the chat function. Then we have Dr. Xindu Zhu, who's a political analyst at CGTN, and also is associated with Renmin University. We have Yalin Wang, somebody I know very well, and we've interacted with her for many years. She's a team leader at the Sustainable Business and Investment Division of UNDP China. And then we have Professor Keiyu Guan, who is a senior researcher and deputy secretary-in-chief of the Way Beyond Research Group at the Central Party School. So all of the bios, of course, are available online. And I'm very delighted to have Marina Rudiak join us as a commentator. She's done extensive studies on China's activities abroad, especially in relation to international development cooperation. She has also been in Beijing before, lived there, and she's a postdoc at the University of Heidelberg. So we have to be very careful not to exceed the allotted time, which is basically 5 minutes max for all the speakers, including the commentator. I know it's challenging, but these are challenging times. And in the event that you go over time, I will apologize in advance for either muting you or just asking you to wrap up your session or your comments. And there will be time in the Q&A session to discuss your questions. Some questions have already come beforehand to us, and then we will, of course, get some comments from Marina, and we can use those to undertake a discussion between the panelists. So before we get started with the first panelist, I'd like to request my co-moderator, Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics to say a few introductory remarks. Thank you.
Hi, dear friends and colleagues. It is a very interesting time with all the challenges going on. First of all, I should say we are safe, and we are still working extremely hard to face such sort of challenges. And it's so good to see so many great friends that we are unable to meet for primarily for the interruption of the COVID. And but we need to continue to engage in our research and also to serve a better world by our great work. So through the long-term collaboration between my Center of International Business Ethics with Oslo University, and through our network with all the great friends here, we are able to make a lot of headways. And now the theme multilateralism and China's role under a changing world order. What are we positioned, particularly on the Belt and Road? What are our understanding, and what would be the global perception over Chinese existing and also rising role? So I think that's something very fundamental to address both the current issues and also the prospect the world might itself represent. So it is the very important opportunity for all of us to sit together virtually though, to share our ideas and views and communicate. And also the way we do it is really multilateralism itself. And so right now I should be there to thank my friend, Dr. and Professor Dan Bennick for taking the initiative to organize such an event. And also I'm equally and grateful to all of you, the participants here. So now I would give the floor to the first speaker.
Before we introduce, perhaps Professor Baocheng, I just want to introduce Professor Daozhong Jia, who's a professor in the School of International Studies at the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development at Peking University. He's worked extensively on China's international economic relations, particularly in the fields of energy and natural resources, development, aid, etc. Professor Jia, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning to you folks in Norway, in the right? And I'm going to probably need less than 5 minutes. The Belt and Road Initiative, if you ask me what is the logic is to enlarge the pie of the global economy through boosting the potential for consumption in have-not economies. Enlarge the global pie of the economic dynamism through boosting the potential for consumption in have-not states. Of course, there is Chinese interest. We want to sell. And we manufacture. We are in aggregate scale, a resource poor country. And our growth trajectory is very much like that of many other Asian nations. We focus on engineering. And there is aid, but very much like China, on the receiving end of development aid from other countries, aid should be viewed as a trinity. That is, after aid comes trade, after trade comes investment. So the Belt and Road offer, it's really an open invitation on the table, very much based on China's own experience of the past 40 years. We may have had it more easily than we realize, but nevertheless, like other societies, this is based on a bit of a self-confidence, and along the way there is adjustment. A second quick point is that the Belt and Road idea is a whole lot more than infrastructure. We call it connectivity. Connectivity is a word, a vocabulary China borrows from documents, especially prevalent in Southeast Asia. There are 5 areas: policy coordination, coordination in finance, trade, investment, people-to-people exchanges, right? Now, the third point is, what do we do with the controversies? Some of these things are probably ill-informed. Recently, there is a study out of Chatham House that looks at what happened in Malaysia and Sri Lanka, right? So those things, those kind of development are part of life, but the key for moving the project, again, is open-ended. There is no blueprint in that say there is no real target. This is not centrally planned. I think the key down the road is to have co-financing, a joint contribution, and joint management. Last but not least, for those that don't see wisdom in this idea, those that really look at these relationships between economies in a more hierarchical way, rather than this turning a have-not economy into a potential consumer. What China needs to emphasize is that these projects, including infrastructure projects, are not for exclusive use. And with that, probably we can, as we proceed, we can work to ease some of the suspicions or worries on the part of some of the concerned parties or skeptics. That's probably what I have to say. And I apologize that I have to leave the webinar a few minutes earlier because I'm still on another webinar with my colleagues based in Tokyo. We are talking about China, Japan, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Zha. I'm glad that there are some positives with webinars. One can attend events in all parts of the world from the comforts of one's home. So thank you very much. I hope you can join for us for the conversation, the discussion later on. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the second speaker, Dr. Xinduo Xu, who's a political analyst at CGTN. And he, in addition to hosting a weekly show, he's also associated with the Pangoal Institution, a Beijing-based public policy think tank, and is an adjunct professor at Renmin University of China. Dr. Xu, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the nice introduction. We know that last month, President Xi Jinping declared the Chinese goal of achieving carbon neutral in 2060. And then the question is will BRI go green as China is greening itself? So I will talk a little bit about that. The BRI projects, be conducted in a sustainable way in terms of energy consumption. So what I want to say is how BRI projects are carried out, and it has a lot to do with what China do, or what China does, or how China conducts its own business inside China. For that, we do see quite some encouraging signs. Of course, it's not without some headwinds. For example, just this week, China has launched its new plan to develop this new energy vehicle industry, NEVs, for the next 15 years to 2035. So according to the plan, NEV sales would make up 20% of the total vehicle sales in 2025, in 5 years. And then in 2035, so the goal is to have pure electrical vehicles as a mainstream for auto sales. So here is a little bit unclear, does that mean, mainstream option? But in general, people understand that at least 50% of the new sales, auto sales, will be pure electric vehicles in 2035. Of course, at the same time, preferential policies will be mapped out to facilitate the installation of charging stations, parking, and charging of electric vehicles. And starting from next year, So across the public demand, such as buses, taxis, delivery vehicles, at least 80% of the new vehicles, a new addition, will be electric ones. So these are specific policies China is taking. And we know China's market for NEVs has been the world's largest for 5 consecutive years. And of course, as is well known, China is in the leading position in terms of the renewables. So for China, the renewables or the green or clean energy is not only about reducing carbon emission, but also a source of energy security to avoid geopolitical risks. It's a bit different from what we are talking, but that's related. So China will continue to invest in and develop renewable energies. That's the natural
Dr. Zhu, I believe we've lost the connection with you. I'm sorry that we've lost the connection with Dr. Zhu. So perhaps he can join us for the Q&A session in case he's experiencing some connectivity issues. I suggest then, Dr. Zhu, you're back, I see. Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Can you then just please wrap up in the next minute or so? Thank you.
Okay, next minute, basically, yeah. So what I want to say is like, what China is doing inside the country, it will have a spillover effects on BRI projects. Like what happened in 2013 when China initiated this BRI, China was suffering from overcapacity in the production. So some people would say, by starting such a projects overseas, you can shift some of your overcapacity to overseas. Of course, that point is controversial because people are not sure whether that's the purpose of BRI. But what's true is that China will do what with what it has at hand. If it has a strong capacity in production, it will make use of that. And if it excels in green energy, it will share them probably over a BRI. In fact, China is doing that. Obviously, Chinese companies are doing that. In addition to Chinese companies, China can influence or impact the choices of like BRI countries, for example, by transitioning to clean energy from fossil fuel in a gradual and consistent manner, as China is doing now. It could also prioritize financing of green energy projects. And the Chinese companies, as I said, they are doing that. For example, if we go back a little bit in 2016, BRI, the BRICS New Development Bank, of which China is the biggest participant, gave its first round of long-term green loans worth $811 million to fund clean energy projects. And then you have BYD brought its electric vehicle Santiago, Chile in 2017. So Chile is, of course, fighting heavy air pollution. But Santiago now is becoming the biggest pure this city with the biggest pure electric bus fleet outside China. And in Shenzhen, we know Shenzhen has basically 100% electric bus fleet by the end of 2017 already. So examples like this shows that the spillover effects, it will play some role in BRI going green. And with Xi Jinping's goal in 2060, domestically carbon neutral. So the belief is that investment will continue and that innovation in terms of technology will continue. So that in turn, BRI will benefit tremendously from the Chinese clean energy investment and technologies. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Zhu. Thanks for that great overview of China's environmental protection efforts and the importance of a sustainable BRI. Our next speaker is Yalin Wang from UNDP China, and the title of her presentation, and I apologize, I haven't introduced the other titles, but it is on the website. But Yalin Wang will be speaking about Beyond Recovery Towards 2030, China's role in shaping a new multilateralism after COVID-19. Yalin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. Since my background is coming from UN, actually, of course, I will touch upon the topic about the SDG and, as you mentioned, the multilateralism. And my first point is that why actually we need SDG and multilateralism more than ever at this very emergent time. So because COVID-19 and actually many of the gains achieved under the SDGs is under threat. So UNDP's report on COVID-19 and the Human Development report estimate the global human development, a combination of education, health, and the living standard could fall this year for first time since 1990 when this measurement began. But at the same time, it has made it even more evident that meet the goals in all countries, developing and the developed, is a matter of urgency. The SDG is a roadmap for humanity. They encompass almost every aspect of the human and planetary well-being, and if met, will provide a stable and prosperous life for every person and ensure the health of the planet. But the recovery from COVID-19 needs the collective efforts from all countries, all stakeholders, which strengthen the call for a new multilateralism in which the global governance achieve the goals. To build that better, actually, we need a new kind of a multilateralism. To quote the report on development policy and multilateralism after COVID-19 published by United Nations Economic and Social Council, the new multilateralism must be networked, inclusive, resilient, and effective. So my next point will touch upon what China's role in shaping such kind of a new multilateralism. As you know that China is used to be the very strong supporter to the multilateralism, either firmly aligning with UN families or echoing multilateral initiatives such as the Paris Agreement on climate change. China also reaffirmed that BRI is a multilateral platform for international cooperation for the new drivers of shared development. Post-COVID, the Chinese government seems to have shifted its attention towards more pressing domestic priorities. However, the government's official line is the commitment to BRI remain firm, and the more multilateral approach will be applied. From my point of view, there are three areas that China can embed the principles of the new multilateralism to upgrade the BRI practices. The first area is inclusive and transparent BRI. The improvement of BRI governance required a more inclusive participation from different nations and stakeholders, a more transparent information sharing with the interested parties. There are some positive signals. Actually, recently we see that launched the proposals of China's 40th five-year plan, which emphasized that the BRI will uphold the principle of green, open, and anti-corrupted cooperation, follow the international standards and practices of debt sustainability, and the diversified investment financing system. Another good example is recent injection of 180.2 million US dollars from the 6 BRI partnering countries to fund the setup by Multilateral Cooperation Center for Development Finance, in short MCDF, which include both regional and global financial institutions to tackle bottlenecks in infrastructure projects through capacity building, risk management, information sharing, and also greater resources for project preparation. The second point, areas that I want to mention is a green BRI, as previous speaker already mentioned. Last month, 5 Chinese government ministries jointly just issued the guidance on promoting investment and the financing to address climate change. The guidance comes weeks after President Xi's announcement at the United Nations General Assembly meeting to strengthen ambitions for China to become carbon neutral by 2060 and the peak carbon emission before 2030. While the guidance is not a legal binding document, but it is still important for greening the BRI for several reasons, as I mentioned. The first, actually, the guidance demonstrates how multiple relevant Chinese ministries are aiming to build consensus and collective actions, especially with the involvement of the financial regulators and central bank. The Chinese Policy Bank, who are key financial providers to BRI, such as China Development Bank, China Export Bank, will place higher priority on tackling climate risk in their BRI project. Secondly, the guidance mentioned regulations for overseas investment to align with China's own climate target, which will be different from all previous guidance that only emphasize the host country principle. Last but not least, the guidance clearly mentioned that China should apply and set up the international standards for overseas climate-related investments. Last area I want to mention is healthy and digital BRI. Just as COVID-19 has brought to light the insufficiency in global healthcare and ICT infrastructure, especially within developing countries, it also provides an opportunity for China to fill these gaps through the health and the digital BRI. Redirecting the BRI to focus on soft infrastructure projects in the digital and the health sector could help revitalize interest in the BRI in a post-COVID world. Investment in such projects could also provide an opportunity for China to shape its image as a responsible country. Building back is not an easy journey. The government needs to make choices that build social cohesion, deliver inclusive services, establish a new social contract to build trust and close the gap between people and countries. That's all my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yalin Wang. That was excellent. Numerous points to discuss. Our final panelist, before I invite the commentator, is Professor Kei Guan from the Central Party School. I have to say something about the Central Party School. I think you have the best, most beautiful campus in Beijing. So I'm a little envious that you are there and I can't visit that campus now as we speak. Professor Guan, the floor is yours.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, yes. I think it's too early to talk about the success or failure about Chinese anti-epidemic campaign because it's still something going on. So I think that there are a lot of things that attracting the attentions and considerations from the international community, which is typical Chinese measurements in dealing with the diseases. And as you know, that the greenhouse effect is melting the ice and snow at the polar regions. Some said maybe it's a direct impact on the resurrection of viruses, and it's sealed in depths of millions of years ago. And some discovery of the virus from seawater may be an evidence for that. As the melting going on, who knows if there will be any new or even more dangerous virus to appear. What makes things even worse is that explosive development of certain frontier technologies like AI, like internet technologies, they are changing the traditional living conditions completely. So it's important that we people must be fully aware of the fact that we are fragile and we are so vulnerable that we have to unite more closely than ever before to deal with such confrontations from both nature and artificial, with joint wisdom and joint power. Not a single country can put its own interests above the common interests of human beings. So if suppose the world is learning something from China, I think it has to understand China in a right way. Let me give you a few facts, because the facts never lie. First, Huawei, as you know, which has been suppressed by certain powers severely recently, is 100% private company, all shares held by individuals, and it's not even a listed company. So I think maybe China is misregarded as a fundamental socialist country, or some said even a state capitalist country. So I think it's a misunderstanding on China. Secondly, that as far as the trade agreement between China and US is concerned, it's signed by both governments, which means that the government is playing a more and more important role in the world trade and market transactions. So it's indifferent of whether it's capitalist or communist, or whether it's US or China, or whether it's East or West. So it's nothing to do with this. And thirdly, that Chinese Premier Li Keqiang once said that the average monthly income for more than 600 million Chinese people is something around only 1,000 Chinese yuan, which is something about $150 US. And at the same time, within 100 kilometers distance from the center of Beijing, we still have people of poverty alleviation targets. So China is far from perfect. So of course, neither is the rest of the world, as we can see the recent few days, right? So I personally believe that the Western values, which emphasize the individual freedom, comparing with that, the Chinese collectivist values advocated by China is maybe of positive significance in the future world governance. So as a summary, I would say that a powerful government, well-disciplined people, and the willingness of people to compromise part of their rights to the public communities are maybe the contribution from China to the world. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Guan. Thank you very much for giving us that overview of the need for global unity to fight common threats such as this pandemic. I'd like to now request Dr. Marina Rudiak from the University of Heidelberg to offer brief comments. Marina, there have been lots of issues that have been discussed, so you can be as selective as you wish and maybe throw out some issues that we could discuss together later on.
Thank you very much. Just starting very briefly with Professor Guan's notes, I think that you're completely right that we really need to understand China more and better, because we are at a point where we need more co-creation instead of competition, which requires much more dialogue. And following up on Professor Zha's point on the Belt and Road Initiative, while we don't know whether it will work out or fail, its probably biggest contribution is that it was an extremely creative approach to think about how to link less developed or developing countries to the developed world. And for that, I think China contributed enormously to the shift in how Africa especially is perceived. Now, going to what Dr. Xu and Wang Yalin have said on the recent shifts in Chinese stance towards sustainability and green economy. it's really great to see that China shall become carbon neutral by 2060. But there is one thing that I think it's concerning to us among development cooperation specialists, and this is the implementation gap. Because on the one hand, we have seen a lot of commitments coming from the top levels of the Chinese government to make the BRI more green. But even in the BRI action plan, there is a contradiction between economic targets and green targets, which we see implemented in the fact that 40% of BRI energy investments actually still goes into conventional coal. And as of now, while China's environmental standards are becoming more strict in implementation, what is happening with Chinese enterprises is something that we have observed in the West as critical development scholars very critically for a while, namely that companies start moving out to places where standards are less strictly enforced. And as long as the performance evaluation criteria for state-owned enterprises CEOs value economic factors above environmental governance and sustainability factors, the question is how really to ensure that their overseas investment and financing is becoming more green. Dr. Xu talked about the BRI spillovers, and the question is, how can we really ensure, or how can the Chinese government ensure that these spillovers will be green and clean? Because as of now, there seems to be diverging interests among the Chinese government, where the top level government wants to improve the greenness and sustainability, but Chinese state-owned enterprises, mostly in their overseas investment, are oriented towards economic profit. So how to change these incentives? And on the last point, the Chinese government has been arguing that the BRI is China's contribution to multilateralism. But what we have seen in the implementation is that it's so far has been rather a form of multi-bilateralism, where China would agree to a common idea, but then negotiate with countries bilaterally. So the question that then arises is whether China actually has a different definition or understanding of what multilateralism is and should be, and whether we need more dialogue on that so that we are actually clear on what kind of multilateralism we are talking about, and do we need to come to arrive at a new definition of multilateralism where we are actually sure that we're using the same word and meaning the same concepts. So to sum it up, I think the biggest challenge in terms of BRI and post-COVID recovery will be not between China and the West or the industrial or developing world, but between economic drivers and environmental sustainability, which is a confrontation we see now everywhere in the world. And this is something we need to resolve to deal with climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina. Professor Liu, would you like to come into the conversation? We have received several questions, and of course, Marina has raised several issues, and we'd like to ask the panelists, but maybe you want to come in at this point and perhaps address the issue of this point that Marina made about how does China define and understand multilateralism?
Yes, China has a tradition to map out very broad aspects of the development. For example, the shared future of the mankind is something that's the ultimate goal, but what would be exactly the roadmap, that need to be cleared. So as for the Belt and Road, I do concur with Charlotte that okay, what are the rules we are playing, and what is really the definition of, is it really a regional integration program, or it's really a multilateral one? And so the confusion lies in the fact that people do not know what kind of rule book we are really playing about, because China is more engaged in the project-based or bilateral-based operation. So the second point is that China does need to do a better homework before we are able to successfully pass the global exam. Because I often joke that if kids piss in their own bed at home, and they would like to piss the other houses. So therefore, how they can be disciplined and how they are really learning to respect the environment, respect the human rights, and there's a lot more training, and there's a lot more regulatory disciplines that they need to receive. And the third one is that allegedly China has been creating a lot of debt holes along the Belt Road, but I would see it in the opposite way. So China, is creating a lot of credit holes, because nobody really wanted to build a project that cannot really see any sign of return on their investment. So overall, it's really a big learning curve that Chinese government and Chinese businesses need to climb before they can really present the right type of image as so much desired by President Xi, and also to meet the expectation of the global community.
Thank you, Professor Liu. I want to address, we've received several questions, and I'd like to perhaps get Professor Xindu Zhu into the conversation. And this has to do with the kind of strategies that China is pursuing in terms of BRI, while on the one hand, there's been considerable focus on the environmental aspect, sustainable development, clean energy, hydroelectric power, solar plants, wind power, all of that. At the same time, there is this inconsistency that, of course, Marina raised and several others point to, and that has to do with coal power. And you see this, there's a new plant being commissioned in Zimbabwe, but also within China, despite the ambitious goals that have been set, there is this kind of inconsistency. How do you see that playing out? Because on the one hand, China is projecting itself as a leader of clean energy, and on the other hand is one of the biggest supporters of coal power.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point. I think a lot of people would ask the question, for example, the Chinese investment in the coal-fired power plants in, for example, in Pakistan. People would say, why don't you help Pakistan go green instead of investing in this, fossil fuel, which pollutes the air, pollutes, other countries. There's a fair point, but I think, usually things on the ground is more complicated than probably the plan on paper. For example, if you want to go green, actually you need to balance different factors. For example, you want to maintain your economic growth. And at the same time, you want to have a environmental sustainability, that is going green, economic development. At the same time, of course, you want to have a energy security. You don't want to jump in the green energy even without the sure way to develop it. For example, with wind and solar power in China, I think 2017, 30% of the energy produced by wind and solar in Xinjiang and Gansu, where you have a lot of sunshine, but actually was not bring into the national grid because of lack of technology. So you see, it's not that easy, I guess. And secondly, I think it's simply a process. Still for the Chinese, big SOEs, they are used to do investment in the traditional energy projects. Their change is a gradual process, just like China is changing in a gradual process. For example, today in Beijing, you would see increasing number of green plates on the cars. Basically, that means, okay, the new energy vehicles. But that's a process. It takes time. And also you see more and more along the BRI is actually financed with clean technology, such as more investment in China. I think the first wind power plants in Vietnam, the largest in Southeast Asia, is being built by the Chinese companies. Similarly in Laos and in Africa, Zimbabwe, in Chile, Latin America, etc. I do think it will ultimately go green. It's really about how fast it will go. And then you need investment, you need mature technology and mature practice. Based on that, probably things will go easy. But again, it takes time.
Thank you very much. Professor Jha, I believe you're still with us. If you can please turn on your camera. Yes, thank you also for answering some of the questions in the Q&A. In terms of your proposed topic for today, in terms of Europe, say China-EU relations, in terms of collaboration, there's been all this kind of talk about trilateralism, entering into partnerships or even bilateral relationships with specific countries. And given, of course, what is happening in the US and the uncertainty, how do you see China-EU relations playing out in the near future? Where do you see areas of collaboration potential, but also where do you think are the main sort of challenges in terms of future collaboration between China and the EU?
Partly because of a webinar I'm going to be speaking at in 2 hours. In Africa, actually, there have been a good number of efforts of trilateral collaboration. For example, most recently, you have a China, Tanzania, and UK collaboration. I think one way we could go forward is to look at some of the cases of trilateral cooperation in the recent past and see how and why some succeeded, some did not. And secondly, on the Chinese side, very much like what Professor Liu was talking about earlier on, a lot of times our business managers, let's put it that way, are really innocents abroad. They don't really understand the social dimensions, cultural dimensions. They probably imagined by going into another country, they would be treated just as how China and the Chinese treated the inflow of foreign experts, foreign engineers, and foreign capital, which is far from the case. And in this case, trilateral cooperation probably begins with, for example, Europeans who have more experience in dealing with a developing or low-income country to share their experiences with Chinese. And this is not really a loss for the European side. It's very useful and necessary of knowledge transfer. And third, which is at this point of time, it's not receiving as much attention. Between China and Europe, especially among the elites and policymakers, we should be mindful of a temptation on the part of some actors in Africa or in another developing country. Sometimes, the international think tanks, NGOs are part of that, having a little bit of a temptation to set off a kind of competition just based on these abstract notions of influence or this abstract notion of power. After all, more successful local projects, especially in Africa and in the Middle East, do benefit Europe in a very tangible way. That's to help slow down the economic migration out of those regions. We are not very good here in China, these large conceptual notions. I read the paper published by a number of European institutions on connectivity with Asia. And frankly speaking, sometimes we have to reach to the dictionary to get a sense of what exactly is meant therein. What I'm really trying to say is that probably we parachute ourselves a little bit down to the ground and see what specific circumstances we are facing, rather than making this China versus EU, or China versus the US, or another major actor issue.
Thank you, Professor Jha. You're absolutely right. I think there is, of course, now the need to share, knowledge and best practices. We need several new arenas to actually have that kind of exchange. And I'm glad that we have started this, at least here, in terms of our project. I want to move on to Yalin Wang, because we've just spoken about China-EU relations. I wanted you to reflect, please, on, say, South-South cooperation and how you see that panning out in the next few years. I'm asking this because there has been some concern in some quarters about debt relief on the growing debt, right, in terms of how this will play out in the near future, to what extent China wants to collect on its debts, even though there isn't any evidence of that happening now. So how do you see that has impacted South-South cooperation? Do you still think it is a positive narrative that was the case pre-COVID? Even now, after the pandemic, do you see this kind of South-South cooperation being strengthened between China and other countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America?
Thank you, Dr. Bennett. I think from my point of view, especially my observation from the perspective of the development cooperation, I think the conclusion is that actually the Chinese government try to strengthen the South-South cooperation with different approach and different partners, especially like the UN agencies, like other bilateral and multilateral kind of a platform. I just give you an example that there's a Chinese, kind of a reform about China's kind of a development assistance, this development cooperation in the past few years. One of the key improvement is the setup of the CICA, the China International Development Cooperation Agency, which is leading at the strategic level and in terms of the funding support to support the whole process of the China overseas development cooperation. So one of the example is that under these agencies, they're set up like $30 billion South-South aid fund, specifically to support the cooperation under the South-South cooperation platform framework. And for instance, like a UNDP and other UN agencies, we already applied successfully for this funding to support the development project in other developing countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, especially after COVID-19. Actually, there's a kind of a release of the emergency fund to allow some kind of emergency procurement for other developing countries to combat with the COVID-19 with the sufficient kind of protecting the kind of a material required from their side. I think from my point of view, South-South cooperation will be strengthened, especially after COVID-19. And we talking about build back better. And there's a huge kind of demand for development cooperation to really to leave to pay more attention on the livelihoods after the COVID-19. Yeah, this is my my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question for Professor Guan from one of the attendees, and this is the question. Is the promotion and strengthening of the domestic market gaining more relevance in China's development strategy after COVID? If so, how can these structural changes in the domestic sphere affect the focus of the Belt and Road outside of China? Professor Guan, can you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, this is a good question, and this is also what the Chinese government is doing to deal with the recent severe changes of the world situations. Because China is more or less a export-oriented country. Because if you I just visited the Pearl River Delta a few days ago, that we can see there are a lot of Chinese manufacturers, factories is one next to another. So it's a very big basis on which China is acting as an international manufacturer. So the Chinese economy is relying on the world market very much, and although it's getting better recently, so to deal with the change of situation, we are stressing that we have to build internal circulation of the economy, but it doesn't mean that we give up the international market development, because you know, the economy is a network, and it's mutually relied on. So there's still strong needs from international markets, as I saw in the investigations. There are a lot of orders just flooding in. So so still we have enough confidence on the world market, but it's you know, it's both internal and external markets are just something with a joint you know, relations. So what we are doing in domestic market is just to deal with the special situation at this moment, and we hope, it's quite hopefully that I personally believe that things will change, and it will get better in the future, because confrontation is not is always temporary. It cannot be internal. So that's why we have to be confident of both domestic and international markets for Chinese people.
Thank you very much. Marina, we're running out of time, but do you want to jump in? Any final thoughts that you can sum up in a minute or so?
Yes, I think we really need much more interaction between Chinese and European actors in terms of trilateral cooperation, because just interacting with European government organizations and development cooperation organizations, the point that China is still learning is something most are not aware of. Rather, it is believed that China is a monolithic actor where companies act, you know, really know what's going on and consciously do not work by international standards. And I think this is where we need more honesty and transparency, because when we know what the starting points are, then we really can come together and see what are the comparative advantages, where can we have the knowledge transfer the esteemed participants here were talking about, and create added value, I think, faster than if we would be going, you know, along our paths separately. So I hope that we can take back these ideas respectively to our countries and feed them into the political system.
Thank you, Marina. Professor Liu, can I request you to come in for just a minute, perhaps, and offer your final thoughts?
Yes, it's wonderful that I learned quite a lot, and we focused on the Chinese multilateral type of approach, and we touched upon the fundamental issue as how to define the Chinese way of multilateralism versus the universally accepted one. And the other is that we recognize that China is a recent rise in the global power, and pretty much is really dependent on how China manages itself, manages own companies, and more importantly, to manage the expectation of the hosting countries and also the global communities. And then the social responsibility has been talked very vocally within China, but the differential type of policies between foreign companies in China, state-owned firms, private firms, is still very strong. So we need to harmonize ourselves. And the other is that we do need more policy consistency because we noticed quite a spike in 2016 for Chinese outbound investment, but later on it has dwindled quite a great deal. And many Chinese companies, they reflect that, well, the answer to the call of the Belt and Road Initiative on a political dimension and with the support of state-owned banks, but now they understand they do not have that much management expertise to cope with a large project which was set with too ambitious goals. So this is the right tuition China has paid, but China has to learn, and China can, we believe, turn out to be a good learner, and we may work out a different path of common prosperity versus the Western-dominated rule books. So let's keep our fingers crossed, and let's also, they try to serve as a platform to bridge some of the gaps in the cognitive solutions for the world. So again, I feel very proud that we have so many important guests and touched upon those very significant topics. I hope that we can continue to work together and also make China better understood and make the world, the more inclusive to China itself.
Thank you, Professor Liu. We've run out of time. For those interested in listening to a discussion that Professor Liu and I recently had that has got a lot of attention, particularly in the United States, my colleague Charlotte has just shared a link to my podcast discussion. And it is interesting because I think the title was "What the West Does Not Understand About China." So if you're interested in that provocative discussion, you may want to listen to the podcast. It is now my pleasure to just thank all of these excellent panelists. I apologize that we didn't have that much time for discussions, but that is how it is with webinars. We don't want people to get too bored and not have these to drag on for too long. So thank you to the excellent panelists. Thanks to the commentator. And I'd also like to thank our colleagues at UIBE, Professor Bao Cheng and Xiaosong Li, for having organized this from that side of the world, from China, and to Charlotte Kildahl here at the University of Oslo Center for Development and the Environment for organizing the practicalities. We are still all learning how to do webinars professionally, so apologies if it didn't go as smoothly as you may have expected. I hope that we will be, I'm sure we'll be in touch with each of the panelists individually later on regarding some of the plans we have for publications, but also to be a guest on our various podcasts. A recording of this session will be available on YouTube shortly. So thank you very much, Shishir, and have a great day.